Walter Briggs was 42 years old, and until that Friday evening, he had given 11 years of his life to a woman who had spent the last 3 quietly planning to leave him with nothing. He owned his own electrical contracting business, 11 employees, never missed a payroll. And he had built every dollar of the life Diana enjoyed, while she looked at him like he was furniture. That night, at a family dinner, Diana pulled Walter into the parking lot, and in the dark, she closed her fist and hit him across the left cheekbone. Then she walked back inside, sat down at that table, and told everyone his bruise was from a car door. She said it without flinching, without hesitating, like she'd already decided what happened before it did. What Diana didn't know, what she had never bothered to find out, was that Walter had been watching, documenting, waiting, and that night, sitting at that dinner table with his face bruising in real time, Walter made a decision that Diana would not see coming until it was already done. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Walter guided his white work truck down the familiar streets of his neighborhood, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across neatly trimmed lawns. The magnetic Briggs Precision Electric signs on both doors had collected 11 years of respect in this community. He'd earned every bit of that respect, one properly wired house at a time. His calloused hands rested easily on the steering wheel as he replayed the day's work in his mind. A complete rewiring job at the Peterson place, old knob and tube that needed to go before it became a hazard. He'd walked the homeowner through every step, explained the process in plain language. That's how he'd built his reputation, doing things right and making sure his customers understood exactly what they were paying for. The truck's cab smelled of copper wire and honest work. His tools rode in their designated spots in the back, each one maintained and accounted for. The invoice book showed another day of steady income. 11 employees now, and he'd never missed paying a single one of them on time. The business wasn't flashy, but it was solid. Like him. Walter's mind drifted to Diana as he turned onto their street. 11 years of marriage, and lately it felt like living with a stranger. She'd changed, or maybe she'd just stopped pretending. The way she looked at him now, like his work was somehow beneath her. Like the hands that had built their comfortable life were something to be embarrassed about. He touched his shoulder absently, where the door frame had left its mark 3 months ago. The bruise had faded, but the memory remained sharp. They'd been arguing about his work schedule again. Diana wanted him at some hospital function, but he had emergency calls to handle. When he tried to explain, she'd snapped. The shove came out of nowhere, hard enough to knock him off balance. Walter had said nothing about it. Not to Jerome, not to anyone. But the next day, he'd driven to the electronics store and bought that small camera. It sat in their living room now, discreet but vigilant. He still remembered mounting it, telling himself it was just precaution, insurance, something he hoped would gather dust, and nothing else. Measure twice, cut once, his father used to say. It wasn't just about carpentry. It was about life, about being prepared, about doing things right the first time because you might not get a second chance. The garage door rolled up smoothly as he pressed the remote. His spot was empty. Diana's car was parked at an angle, taking up more space than necessary. It was a small thing, but it spoke volumes. These days, everything seemed to. He parked on the street instead, gathered his paperwork, and headed for the front door. The house was quiet as he entered, but he could feel the tension in the air. Diana's heels clicked sharply on the hardwood floors upstairs. The sound had a rhythm to it that he recognized, pacing, agitated, looking for a fight. Walter set his papers down carefully on the kitchen counter. Everything in its place. The morning's coffee cup was still in the sink where Diana had left it. He washed it automatically, dried it, put it away. The routine was comforting. The routine was real. The clicking of heels stopped. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of Diana coming down the stairs. Walter could picture her expression before he saw it. That particular mix of condescension and barely contained anger that had become so familiar lately. He squared his shoulders, not in challenge, but in preparation. The camera in the living room sat silent in its corner, its motion sensor ready. Walter hoped, as he had hoped every day for 3 months, that tonight wouldn't be the night he needed it. But hope wasn't the same as expectation. His father had taught him that too. "You're late," Diana's voice came from the doorway, sharp as a new wire splice. There was something in her tone that set his instincts humming, the kind of warning signal that told him when a circuit wasn't quite right. Walter turned to face his wife, keeping his expression neutral, his posture open. He had learned long ago that sometimes the most important part of any job was simply being ready for whatever came next. The restaurant parking lot was half full when Walter and Diana arrived, her silver BMW pulling in next to Jerome's truck. Walter spotted Adrian's car 2 spaces down, the familiar blue Volvo she'd driven to countless job sites over the 6 years they'd known each other. She'd hired him for the electrical work on her first major interior design project, and their professional relationship had evolved into a friendship built on shared standards and quiet understanding. The evening air carried the warmth of early fall as they walked toward the entrance. Diana moved slightly ahead, her heels clicking purposefully on the asphalt. She was dressed perfectly, as always, a navy dress that spoke of careful selection and professional polish. Walter followed at his usual measured pace, noting the way she didn't wait for him to catch up. Inside, the private dining room glowed with warm light. Jerome was already seated, deep in conversation with their host. Adrienne looked up as they entered, her smile genuine but careful. She had an observer's patience, that one. Never pushed, never pried, but saw everything that mattered. "Walter! Diana!" Their host stood to greet them. "We were just about to order drinks." The table settled into the rhythm of a family dinner. Conversation flowed easily between work stories and community updates. Walter contributed when asked, answered questions about recent projects, listened more than he spoke. Diana held court at her end of the table, describing a new hospital initiative with practiced charm. The first course arrived, some kind of salad with pears and walnuts. Walter was halfway through it when Diana's hand touched his arm. Her fingers were tight, precise. "Would you step outside with me for a minute?" Her voice was pleasant, social, but Walter recognized the undertone. Something he'd said had hit a nerve. He set his napkin down carefully and followed her out. The parking lot was darker now, the evening settling in. Diana led him between 2 parked cars, out of direct view from the restaurant windows. Her posture had changed, the social polish falling away, revealing something harder underneath. "You couldn't resist, could you?" Her voice was low, controlled. "Making that comment about honest work. Making sure everyone knows exactly what you think of my job." Walter kept his voice steady. "I wasn't commenting on your job, Diana. I was answering a question about—" "Don't," she cut him off. "Don't play innocent with me. You do this every time. Act like you're just the simple, straightforward workman, while making these little digs. Like you're somehow more authentic because you work with your hands. That's not what I—" The movement was sudden, precise. Diana's right fist connected with his left cheekbone, a sharp impact that registered in his teeth. Walter's head rocked slightly with the force, but he didn't raise his hands, didn't step back, just looked at her steadily in the darkness between the cars. Diana's breath came quick and sharp. For a moment, neither of them moved. "We should go back inside," Walter said finally, his voice level. "They'll wonder where we are." They returned to their seats. Walter picked up his fork and continued eating as if nothing had happened. His cheekbone throbbed quietly, a steady pulse of heat that he could feel spreading. Over the next 2 hours, through entrees and dessert, the bruise developed. What started as a slight redness deepened into something more obvious. a darkening patch below his left eye that couldn't be ignored in the restaurant's lighting. "Walter, what happened to your face?" someone finally asked. He didn't register who. Diana answered immediately, her voice warm with affectionate exasperation. "He bumped into the car door in the parking lot. You know how he gets, always somewhere else in his head." Light laughter rippled around the table. Someone made a joke about him needing to pay more attention. Walter smiled politely, nodded, took another bite of his dessert. Across the table, Adrienne's eyes moved from Diana's face to Walter's and back. She noted the fluency of Diana's explanation. No hesitation, no searching for words. The story arrived fully formed, smooth as polished stone. When her gaze met Walter's briefly, neither of them changed expression. Nothing passed between them but recognition. After dessert, Walter excused himself. The night air was cooler now as he walked to his truck. He took out his phone and dialed Jerome's number, turning slightly away from the restaurant windows. "It happened again," he said when Jerome picked up. "On camera this time. I need Deborah's number." Jerome recited it without question. Walter wrote it carefully on the back of a gas receipt, using a pen from his shirt pocket. He thanked his brother, ended the call, and stood for a moment in the quiet of the parking lot. Then he went back inside to finish his coffee. The dashboard clock read 10:47 p.m. as Walter pulled into the gas station. He filled his truck's tank methodically, watching the numbers climb on the digital display. Inside his pocket, the gas station receipt with Deborah Washington's number felt like it carried actual weight. Back in his truck, parked away from the pumps, Walter pulled out his phone. He'd told Diana he needed to stop for gas and would be home shortly. She'd left in her BMW without comment. Deborah answered on the third ring, her voice clear and professional despite the hour. "Deborah Washington. Ms. Washington, this is Walter Briggs. My brother Jerome suggested I call you." He paused, then added, "I apologize for the late hour. Jerome mentioned you might be calling." "What's the situation, Mr. Briggs?" Walter described the evening's events with precise detail. The argument, the assault, Diana's immediate cover story. He worked backward to the incident 3 months ago, the camera purchase, everything documented and saved. His voice remained steady throughout. "And you have footage of both incidents?" Deborah asked. "Yes. The first one from 3 months ago, and the living room camera would have caught her discussing it tonight when we got home. I can be at your house at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Have everything ready." She paused. "Mr. Briggs, once we start this, we move quickly and completely. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes," Walter said simply. "I'll see you at 8. Don't discuss this with her tonight." Walter drove home in silence, his cheek throbbing steadily. The house was quiet when he entered, lights off except for the soft glow from upstairs. He went directly to his home office, closing the door silently behind him. The cloud storage interface was familiar. He'd checked it periodically since installing the camera, never finding anything significant. Until now. He logged in, navigated to recent footage, and began reviewing. The first clip he found was from 6 weeks ago. Diana in the living room, pacing slowly with her phone to her ear. The camera's audio picked up her voice clearly. The timeline needs to work exactly right. "Yes, I understand about the account." No, he doesn't monitor it that closely. Everything has to be in place before spring. Walter watched it twice, noting the timestamp. He didn't understand the full context yet, but something in her tone, the careful precision of it, made him save the clip immediately. Next, he opened his phone's camera. Standing in the office's bright overhead light, he photographed his face from multiple angles. The bruise was stark now, deep purple at the center, spreading yellow at the edges. He made sure each photo showed the timestamp clearly in the corner. He forwarded everything to Jerome. The assault footage, the mysterious phone conversation, the injury photos. One line of text, for Deborah's file. Upstairs, Diana was already asleep when he entered their bedroom. Her breathing was deep and regular, face peaceful against the pillow. Walter lay down carefully, not disturbing the mattress. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet house. The anger he'd expected didn't come. Instead, there was a strange clarity, like watching a circuit diagram resolve itself into perfect sense. He wasn't hurt anymore. He wasn't even disappointed. He was simply finished. Morning arrived with pale autumn light. Walter rose early, dressed quietly, and went downstairs to make breakfast. He prepared Diana's usual Saturday morning plate exactly as he had for 11 years. Scrambled eggs with pepper jack, turkey sausage, wheat toast, black coffee, orange juice. Everything precisely arranged. Deborah arrived at 7:45, professional in a charcoal blazer. She sat up at the kitchen table efficiently. Portfolio open, digital recorder placed beside her coffee cup. Walter heard Diana's footsteps on the stairs at 8:10. She stopped in the kitchen doorway, taking in the scene. Her expression shifted from confusion to something harder as she registered Deborah's presence. "Sit down, Di," Walter said. "Eat while it's hot." "I'm Deborah Washington, attorney at law," Deborah said, laying 3 documents on the table with calm precision. "Family and civil practice. These require your attention." The documents made a soft sound as they slid across the wood. Notice of intent to separate protective order application with time-stamped photographs and footage. Formal letter requesting vacancy within 30 days. Diana laughed, short, incredulous. Then her face went cold. "You need to get out of my house. The property is jointly held under state marital law," Deborah explained, her voice level. "The protective order will be processed by end of business today. Any further physical contact will result in criminal charges filed in addition to the civil proceedings already initiated." She placed her business card on top of the document. "Have your attorney reach me here." Diana turned to Walter, searching his face for something familiar. The man who absorbed, who forgave, who stayed. He met her gaze steadily. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it. "The eggs are getting cold," Walter said quietly. Diana stood abruptly, grabbed her keys. The front door opened and closed. Through the kitchen window, Walter watched her car pull away. He sat back down at the table, picked up his fork, and finished his breakfast. Early morning sunlight streamed through Jerome's kitchen window as Walter sat down at the table, steam rising from the coffee mug Jerome had placed in front of him. Spread across the wooden surface were printouts, photographs, and Jerome's yellow legal pad covered in his precise handwriting. "Tell me what you found," Walter said, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. Jerome pulled out a stack of papers. "Cornelius Page, goes by Neil. Real estate developer, primarily commercial properties. Built his business over the last 15 years. Clean record, well connected." He slid several printed pages across the table. "Sits on multiple boards, but here's the interesting one. He's been on the hospital's donor foundation board for 3 years. Walter nodded, scanning the document. Page's professional profile was carefully curated. Charity involvement, business awards, the polished image of success. "But that's not all," Jerome continued, pulling up his laptop. "Check these out." He turned the screen toward Walter, showing photographs from hospital foundation events. "These are from their website's media gallery." Walter leaned forward. 2 photographs, taken at different galas over the past 14 months. In both, Diana appeared near Page, not obviously together, but close. In the first, they stood in a small group, Diana angled slightly toward him. In the second, they were seated at the same table, Diana's hand resting near his on the tablecloth. "The dates," Jerome said quietly. "First one's from 14 months ago. Second one's from just 2 months back." Walter studied the images without expression. The proximity, the body language, it all carried different weight now. He sat back, taking a slow sip of coffee. "I need to make a call," he said. Walter stepped onto Jerome's back porch, phone in hand. He found Tanya's number and pressed dial, keeping his voice carefully measured when she answered. "Tanya, it's Walter. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Walter? No, Is everything okay?" "I'm trying to understand what happened," he said, letting a hint of confusion enter his voice. "Diana's always talked to you. I need to know where things went wrong." Tanya hesitated. When she spoke, her words came carefully. "Walter, you know I care about both of you." "I know. I'm not looking to cause problems. I just need to understand." The silence stretched. Then, "She's been unhappy for a while, Walter. She felt trapped isn't the right word, maybe. But another pause. There's someone who makes her feel seen, in a way. I shouldn't say more." "I appreciate your honesty," Walter said warmly. "Thank you, Tanya." He ended the call and went back inside. Jerome was still at his laptop, but his expression had changed. "Found something else," Jerome said. In the 14 months since those gala photos, Diana's received 2 lateral promotions at the hospital. Both came with significant pay increases. Walter sat down. "That seems fast." "It is fast. I checked typical advancement patterns for her position and tenure. This kind of movement usually takes 2 to 3 years minimum." Jerome pulled up more documents. "Here's where it gets interesting. The foundation board Paige sits on? They're part of the hospital's executive advisory structure. Board members participate in administrative recommendations, budget discussions, departmental reviews. He was in position to influence her advancement," Walter said. "Exactly. And the timing lines up perfectly with their involvement." Jerome made another note on his legal pad. "This wasn't just personal, Walter. He used his institutional position to professionally advance her while they were involved. That's a serious ethics violation." Walter absorbed this in silence. The affair, the promotions, the careful professional positioning, it was all infrastructure for something bigger, something planned. Jerome slid the new documents into the growing folder. Walter watched him, then stood up. "Keep digging," he said. "I need to get to the job site." "You're going to work?" Jerome asked. "Payroll doesn't stop," Walter replied, picking up his truck keys. "Neither do I." He drove toward the commercial renovation his crew was working on, mind already shifting to wiring diagrams and inspection schedules. The folder would be there when he got back. The truth would keep building itself, one documented piece at a time. Walter pulled into Jerome's driveway, recognizing Deborah's charcoal BMW already parked out front. Inside, they were waiting at the kitchen table, spread with stacks of papers and account statements arranged in neat chronological order. "Sit down, Walter," Deborah said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Jerome and I have been reviewing your financial record." Walter settled into the chair, noting the focused expression on his brother's face as Jerome shuffled through papers covered in his precise handwriting. The morning light through the kitchen window cast long shadows across 14 months of bank statements. "You mentioned Diana handled all the household billing," Deborah began, sliding the first statement forward. "When was the last time you looked at these carefully?" Walter shook his head. "Never had a reason to. She managed it. I trusted her." The words felt hollow now, echoing differently in the quiet kitchen. "Look at this one," Jerome said, pointing to a statement from 11 months back. "See these transfers? Always midweek, always under $600. Walter leaned forward, studying the numbers. Small transfers, scattered through the month. $475 here, $550 there, $325 another day. Nothing that would trigger attention in the noise of regular business deposits and household expenses. "Now, this one," Jerome continued, laying out another statement. "Same pattern, different amounts, different days, but always midweek, when your business billing cycles created the most account activity." Statement after statement told the same story. Small extractions, carefully timed, moved to an account Walter had never seen or known about. His eyes tracked the numbers, while his mind assembled the bigger picture. This wasn't impulse or emotion. This was strategy, patience, planning. Jerome picked up his yellow legal pad, covered in columns of figures. He drew a line under the final total and slid it across the table. $31,200. Walter stared at the number. 14 months of calculated withdrawals. An exit fund built in plain sight, while he focused on growing his business and trying to understand why his marriage felt increasingly hollow. "Is what she did illegal?" he asked, looking at Deborah. "The systematic movement of jointly held marital funds into an undisclosed private account with documented intent to exit the marriage?" Deborah's tone was precise. "Yes. It constitutes financial fraud under state marital asset statutes. Combined with the documented assault, the active protective order, and the pattern of deception," she gathered the statements into a neat pile. "Diana has constructed an extraordinarily clean case against herself. She just doesn't know it yet." Walter sat back, processing. Diana hadn't been planning a heated exit. She'd been engineering a controlled departure, funded, insulated, timed to her advantage. She intended to walk away with Walter holding the mortgage on a house she had already mentally vacated, paying bills on a life she had already closed the books on. "She thought I was asleep," he said quietly. "They always do," Deborah replied, closing her portfolio. Later that evening, alone in his kitchen, Walter picked up his phone. He scrolled to Adrienne's number and pressed dial, not entirely sure what he wanted to say, but knowing he needed to say something to someone who would understand without trying to fix it. She answered on the second ring. "Walter?" "Hey." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Do you have a minute?" "I have all of them," she said simply. "What's going on?" He told her, not everything, but enough. The transfers, the planning, the careful construction of an exit he never saw coming. Adrienne listened without interrupting, giving him space to put words to the weight of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you need?" "Nothing right now," he said. "I just needed to say it out loud to someone who wouldn't try to fix it." "Okay," she replied, and stayed on the line. They talked about nothing in particular after that. Her latest design project, a funny story about her nephew, the weather turning cooler. Her voice kept him company while he made dinner, neither of them acknowledging what it meant that she was still there, still listening, still holding space without demanding he fill it. When they finally hung up, Walter sat at his kitchen table for a long moment. Then he pulled out a fresh legal notepad and uncapped his pen. At the top of the clean page, he wrote one word: everything. The home office felt different in Diana's absence. Walter moved through it methodically, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the desk as he worked through the inventory Deborah had requested. Each drawer, each file, each document carefully reviewed and noted. The silence in the house had a weight to it now. Not oppressive, just present. He worked his way down to the lower shelves, moving through rows of neatly labeled binders, tax records, insurance policies, maintenance logs for the house. His hand brushed something leather-bound behind the last row. A book he didn't recognize. He pulled it out, the familiar weight of a journal settling in his hands. Diana's handwriting filled the pages. He held it for a long moment, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight streaming through the window. Then he opened it. The first entries were from 3 years ago. What struck him immediately wasn't anger or pain or confusion. It was the pure functionality of how she wrote about him. Walter paid the contractors today. Walter thinks we should take a vacation in June. Walter fixed the pipe in the guest bathroom again. Wouldn't let me call a plumber. No warmth, no malice, just notation, like recording the weather or logging a maintenance schedule. He was infrastructure, a utility to be documented. The entries continued, page after page of a life he thought they were building together reduced to operational notes. His morning coffee routine, the way he organized his tools, the predictability of his work schedule. Everything he had thought was devotion to their shared life, was being recorded as pattern recognition, the studying of a system to understand its vulnerabilities. Page appeared by initial 18 months in. These entries weren't romantic either. They were logistical. Meeting windows carefully noted. Cover stories tested and adjusted. A timeline taking shape in careful increments. NP suggests Tuesday lunches look more natural. Used the foundation meeting as cover. Worked perfectly. Changed regular coffee shop. Too many familiar faces. Then he found it. 8 months ago, written in the same steady hand. If I time this right, I can be out by spring. He won't see it coming. He never sees anything coming. Walter closed the journal. The room had grown darker. The sun nearly set. He didn't turn on a light. He sat in his chair and let 11 years wash over him in waves. Every breakfast he made her. Every payroll he met so she could build her career without worry. Every time he listened when she talked about her day. Every moment of patience he gave freely, thinking it was investment in their shared future. All of it had been catalogued like assets to be valued and liquidated before departure. He thought about the morning she told him she was considering the hospital administrator position. How proud he'd been. How he'd adjusted his schedule to make sure dinner was ready when she got home those first few months, while she adjusted to the new role. The private smile he'd worn, writing "Congratulations" on the card he left with flowers on her desk. The same desk where she'd later write meeting schedules with Paige. The weight of it settled into his bones. 11 years. He had been faithful, present, generous with his time and his money and his patience. He had made himself smaller when she needed to feel larger. Had absorbed her moods and her criticisms and, finally, her violence. Telling himself it was what marriage meant. What love meant. He sat with it. All of it. The full, unfiltered truth of what had been done, not to him, but through him. He gave himself permission to feel every moment of it. One night. That was what he would allow it. The darkness in the office was nearly complete when he finally stood. His joints were stiff from sitting so long. He walked to the kitchen, his movements mechanical but purposeful. Made coffee. Stood at the counter while it brewed, listening to the familiar sounds of the machine. When the coffee was ready, he poured a cup and carried it back to the office, turned on the desk lamp, pulled out the thick folder containing the financial records, the photographs, the camera footage. He placed the journal inside and closed the folder. The evidence was complete. The kitchen table had become a command center. Every piece of evidence laid out in precise order. Walter sat at one end, Jerome and Adrienne flanking him on either side. Outside, the evening had settled into that peculiar stillness that comes just before full dark. "Start from the beginning," Jerome said, legal pad ready. Walter walked them through it methodically. The first assault 3 months ago, the shove into the doorframe he'd told no one about. The camera he bought the next day. Diana's careful coldness in the weeks that followed. The parking lot, the bruise, the cover story at dinner that arrived without hesitation. Adrienne's hands were steady on her coffee cup, but her knuckles had gone white. She hadn't spoken yet. She was watching Walter with the specific attention of someone who had been watching him for 6 years, filing away what she saw, but never presuming to speak on it. "The financial records show it clearly," Walter continued, spreading the account statements across the table. 14 months of transfers. Small amounts, always under $600, always midweek when the business billing cycles created noise in the account. Total of $31,200 moved to an account I never knew existed. Jerome was already taking notes, his paralegal's mind mapping out legal frameworks. The timing overlaps perfectly with Paige's appearance in the hospital foundation records. Walter nodded. 2 lateral promotions in 14 months. Paige sits on the donor foundation board with direct access to administrative recommendations. She wasn't just having an affair with him. He was actively advancing her professionally while it was happening. Adrienne spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the weight of long observation, the dinner parties, the way she'd position herself when hospital staff were present. It wasn't just social. She was building something. The journal confirms everything. Walter placed it on the table. 3 years of entries. Not emotional. Tactical. She was studying me like someone studies a system they're planning to exit. Logging patterns. Noting vulnerabilities. Jerome's pen moved steadily across the legal pad. The documented assault combined with the financial fraud creates an extremely clean case. The camera footage alone. We wait, Walter cut in. She keeps her dignity until she moves first. The second she does, we move, but not before. They both looked at him. He met their eyes steadily. I need you both to understand something. This isn't about revenge. This is about truth with proper documentation. Nothing more, nothing less. The next morning, Walter called the hospital's HR department. His voice was steady, pleasant. Just an employee's spouse confirming a mailing address change for insurance correspondence. The conversation was brief, efficient. And in its course, he confirmed one crucial detail. Neil Page's active seat on the Donor Foundation board. He made a note of it, filed it away, did not act on it. 4 days passed in relative quiet. Walter ran his business, made payroll, checked inventory, submitted bids on 3 new commercial projects. The rhythm of actual work kept him centered. Then Diana moved. The letter from her attorney arrived by courier Thursday afternoon. Walter was at his desk reviewing supply orders when it landed in front of him. Heavy, cream-colored paper, official letterhead, certified mail tracking number in the corner. He read it twice, each word landing with the weight of tactical error. Diana was filing a counterclaim. The language was precise and devastating. Allegations of emotional abuse spanning years, claims of financial control and isolation from household resources, assertions that Walter had dominated the joint accounts, restricted her access to funds, created an environment of economic dependence. The letter concluded with a formal demand. Walter was to vacate the marital home within 72 hours. Diana would retain primary financial interest in the property. Walter set the letter down, picked up his phone, dialed Deborah's direct line. She just handed me everything, he said when she answered. I know. Deborah's voice carried the specific satisfaction of a professional who had been waiting for exactly this moment. I've been waiting for her to do exactly that. The mediation office felt smaller than its actual dimensions, all polished wood and muted lighting designed to suggest importance without imposing it. Walter sat beside Deborah, Jerome positioned just behind them, the banker's box centered precisely on the table in front of him. He had arrived 20 minutes early, not from anxiety, but from habit. His father's voice in his head. Being early is being on time. Being on time is being late. The room had that particular stillness of spaces waiting to be filled with consequence. Walter breathed it in, letting it settle in his chest. His hands were steady on the table's surface. Diana arrived exactly on schedule, her attorney trailing slightly behind. She wore a carefully selected charcoal dress that spoke of both professional authority and appropriate restraint. Her heels made precise sounds on the hardwood as she crossed to her chair. She carried herself with the specific poise of someone who believed they were still conducting events rather than participating in them. The mediator, a silver-haired woman with 30 years of family law experience evident in her bearing, began with the standard preliminary statements. Walter listened, without really hearing, his attention focused on the box in front of him. Everything that mattered was in that box. 14 months of bank statements, photographs, journal entries, camera footage, phone records, truth with proper documentation. Mrs. Briggs has submitted a counterclaim alleging patterns of emotional abuse and financial control. Diana's attorney began, his tone suggesting reasonable people discussing reasonable concerns. Our position is that "If I may," Deborah interrupted quietly. She opened her portfolio and removed the first document. "I'd like to begin with the financial records." What followed was not dramatic in any conventional sense. No raised voices, no tears, no theatrical revelation. Instead, it was a methodical dismantling conducted across 2 hours and 3 recesses, each piece of evidence laid out with surgical precision. First, 14 months of bank statements, transfers highlighted in yellow. Small amounts, always under $600, moved midweek when business transactions created cover noise. Total, 31,200 to an undisclosed account. Diana's attorney called the first recess. When they reconvened, Deborah presented the time-stamped photographs of Walter's injuries, both instances. The bruise from the parking lot, documented at multiple angles. The shoulder impact from the doorframe 3 months prior. Clinical, unambiguous. Diana kept her face carefully neutral. Then, the camera footage. First clip. Diana shoving Walter into the doorframe. Date and time embedded in the lower corner. Second clip. Diana in the living room, phone to ear, discussing timelines and the account, and making sure everything was in place by spring. Diana's attorney called the second recess. The journal came next. Deborah did not read it aloud. She simply placed it on the table and opened it to marked pages. 3 years of entries. Not emotional outpourings, but tactical observations. Walter's patterns, his schedule, his trust with the accounts. Diana's attorney studied the pages without expression. Finally, the phone records. A text message to Gloria, time-stamped 7:14 a.m. that Saturday morning. "Walter had an accident with the car door last night. You know how he gets when he's distracted. Just wanted to let you know in case you heard anything." Sent 41 minutes before Diana came downstairs and found Deborah at her breakfast table. She had been managing the lie before she knew the morning had already moved past her. Diana's attorney called the third recess. When they returned, he withdrew the counterclaim without preamble. Walter slid the settlement proposal across the table. The terms were clear. He would retain the house, the business, and all retirement accounts in his name. Diana would receive what remained in joint savings, minus the $31,200 and legal fees. She could keep her personal property and vehicle. Both parties would sign a binding non-disparagement agreement. Diana looked across the table at Walter. She was searching his face for something. Some remnant of the man who had made her breakfast every Saturday morning for 11 years. The man who had absorbed and forgiven and made himself smaller so she could feel larger. Walter gave her nothing but patience. "You planned all of this," she said quietly. "You planned yours first," he replied. "I just planned mine better." Diana signed without another word. Deborah closed her portfolio with a soft finality. Walter stood, lifted his banker's box, and walked out of the building into the afternoon light. Behind him, the room held only silence and the weight of properly documented truth. Walter was checking inventory sheets in his work truck when his phone buzzed. Diana's mother's name lit up the screen. He looked at it for a moment, then answered, "How dare you?" Her voice trembled with carefully curated outrage. "After everything she did for you?" Walter let her continue. He owed her that much. Not because Diana deserved an advocate, but because Margaret had spent 11 years believing in a version of her daughter that Diana had constructed with practiced care. The fury spilling through his phone wasn't really about him. It was about that construction beginning to crack. For 6 straight minutes, Margaret laid out Diana's narrative. Walter's controlling behavior, his isolation tactics, his financial dominance, how Diana had been trapped, how she had finally found the courage to leave, how Walter had responded with vindictive legal action designed to destroy everything she'd built. Walter waited until she ran out of words. The silence that followed held a challenge. Defend yourself. Would you like to know what actually happened? His voice was steady, almost gentle. Before she could answer, he began. He told her about the first assault, the shove into the door frame that left the bruise on his shoulder. about the camera he installed afterward, hoping he would never need it, about the dinner and the parking lot, and Diana's closed fist meeting his cheekbone, about her cover story at the table, delivered without hesitation, while his face darkened visibly over dessert. He told her about the 14 months of financial records, small transfers, carefully timed, $31,200 moved in pieces to an account he never knew existed. He told her about finding Diana's journal, about reading 3 years of entries that treated him like infrastructure, present but invisible, useful but disposable, about the entry from 8 months ago that stopped his breath. If I time this right, I can be out by spring. He won't see it coming. He never sees anything coming. I have all of it documented, Walter said quietly. The transfers, the footage, the bruises, the journal, everything. The silence that followed was the longest single beat in the conversation. Walter could hear Margaret breathing on the other end of the line, processing the collision between the daughter she thought she knew and the daughter revealed in Walter's careful sequence of facts. He ended the call with simple courtesy. I need to get back to work. 22 minutes later, his phone buzzed again. Margaret's voice had changed, not soft, but stripped of its earlier certainty. I didn't know. I know you didn't, Walter replied. He ended the call with the same gentle finality. The truth, properly documented, continued its quiet work. Within days, the legal proceedings became a matter of record, and records have a specific gravity in professional circles. The documentation of Diana's accelerated promotions alongside Paige's undisclosed board advocacy reached the hospital's general counsel through formal discovery channels. An internal review opened immediately. What had surfaced was worse than the affair. Over 14 months, Paige had made 2 direct recommendations advancing Diana through the hospital's executive structure. Both actions were taken without disclosure of their personal relationship. Both constituted clear violations of the Foundation Board's ethics policy. The Foundation Board convened a special session. Paige resigned before they could vote to remove him, a distinction that changed nothing about the outcome. His name vanished from 2 naming opportunities on the hospital's new wing, a public-facing consequence that traveled through the donor community at the speed of carefully worded concern. The damage expanded. 2 of Paige's active real estate development projects had been partially financed through a community investment fund tied to the hospital foundation. With his board exit and the ethics finding on record, the fund's oversight committee initiated an immediate review. One project had its funding suspended pending full investigation. The other was restructured under new oversight. Diana's carefully curated social world contracted to silence. Tanya, her closest friend and unwitting informant, called to say she would not be positioned in the middle of this. The friendship ended without drama, marked only by calls that stopped being returned. Diana's administrative leave, already in effect from the initial conflict of interest review, converted to a formal separation. She did not contest it. There was nothing left to contest with. Jerome called Walter with news of Paige's board resignation, heard through his firm's professional network. Walter listened, said nothing, finished his coffee, and went back to work. 4 weeks after the mediation, Walter's phone lit up with a name he trusted: Sarah Chen, facilities director for the regional school district. Her voice carried an awkward tension he'd never heard from her in 6 years of reliable service calls. "Walter, I need to have an uncomfortable conversation with you." He sat back in his office chair, already understanding. "Go ahead, Sarah." "We received an anonymous tip through our compliance portal. It suggests—" She paused, professional discomfort evident. "It implies financial irregularities in how Briggs Electric handles district contracts. I know this is probably nothing, but policy requires—" "A formal review," Walter finished. "I understand completely. When would you like to meet?" The next morning, Walter arrived at the district offices carrying 2 bankers' boxes and accompanied by Deborah Washington. Sarah met them in the conference room, along with the district's compliance officer and their legal counsel. Walter opened the first box and began laying out documents with the same methodical precision he applied to circuit diagrams. 2 years of complete financial records. Every district contract, payment, and service record. Bonding certificates, insurance documentation, state licensing renewals, employee certifications, quality control reports, safety compliance records. A complete audit trail showing every dollar that had ever moved between Briggs Precision Electric and the school district. "Take whatever time you need," Walter said quietly. "I'll answer any question you have." The compliance officer spent 3 hours going through the records. Walter answered each question with direct simplicity. Yes, that was the original quote. Yes, that matched the final invoice. Yes, those were the actual labor hours. Every number aligned. Every document was properly filed. Every certification was current. The review closed within a week. No findings. But Deborah was already moving. She filed an amended legal action against Diana for tortious interference with business relations. The anonymous tip traced cleanly to an email account Diana had created 6 months earlier on a device registered in her name. The IP address resolved to her apartment. The digital chain was complete and unbroken. Diana's attempt to damage Walter's business became the final stone that sealed her professional tomb. The tortious interference filing became part of the public record, linked forever to her name in the kind of database searches employers run before making hiring decisions. She relocated out of state 3 months later. Walter learned this only because Jerome mentioned it once over coffee, an offhand detail neither of them felt the need to discuss further. The work continued. Payroll was met. Service calls were answered. Life moved forward with the steady rhythm Walter had always maintained. 14 months passed. Walter sat at his kitchen table on a clear morning, drinking coffee from a mug his niece had painted for his birthday. The glaze was uneven, his name spelled out in wobbly block letters, with a small lightning bolt because she knew what he did for work. The morning light came in cleaner now through windows he'd replaced last spring. Better thermal grade. Something he'd been meaning to do for years. Briggs Precision Electric had just closed its strongest fiscal year on record. 2 new apprentices hired, both showing real promise. A second location across town was in early negotiation. The work was good. The work had always been good. Upstairs, he could hear Adrienne moving around, getting ready for her day. They had been whatever this was for 2 months. Neither of them had felt the need to name it precisely. It hadn't begun as anything romantic. It had begun as 2 people who had been honest with each other for years, finally acknowledging that the last small distance between them no longer served any purpose. They hadn't rushed. They hadn't needed to. One evening over dinner, Walter had told her the complete truth about what the last year had taken out of him. She had told him the truth about watching from a careful distance for 6 years. Neither of them had anywhere else to be that night, and neither of them wanted to be anywhere else. Walter finished his coffee and stood, carrying the mug to the sink. He rinsed it carefully and set it in the rack to dry. Through the kitchen window, he could see the morning traffic beginning to build. People heading to work, heading home, moving through their lives with purpose. He heard Adrienne's unhurried footsteps upstairs, the sound of someone completely comfortable in a space. He stood at the window for a moment, not out of grief, not out of longing, but with the quiet certainty of someone doing a final accounting. 11 years, a parking lot, a bruise, a table set for truth, a folder full of evidence a woman had built against herself without knowing it. Walter reached over and turned off the kitchen light. He went upstairs. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.